Hello out there. I am Stacy, your empathic therapist, and or at least on YouTube. And welcome to my approach to talking about narcissism and narcissistic recovery, as well as talking about what it means to be a gifted, empathic, or highly sensitive person. It is my contention that we are collectively weaving our way through great pathology in all of our systems. But I think that there are so many of you who are potentially here to do something about that. And that's why I'm here doing what I do. I often say that I help people just like you because the world needs you. What I'm going to talk about today is a topic I've been interested in, I've been researching, and I've really wanted to bring out into the greater public eye. This is stemming primarily from my work with clients, but the topic is about if your wife or female partner is a vulnerable narcissist, or what's been commonly called a covert narcissist. I did a separate video about that. I don't like the term covert. It's not clinically sound or accurate, and it implies a motivation and an agenda that most of these people simply don't have. They are not covert in their machinations. I think all narcissists can move between being more obvious and less obvious with their behavior and with their intentions. But I find the covert term a bit unhelpful. That being said, I've had more vulnerable narcissists in my life do some very covert things. And that's a separate conversation for a separate day. But it has been my experience that for men, living with a woman who presents a little bit more on the vulnerable side than more overtly or obviously narcissistic, this is very confusing and a huge challenge. And I'm going to take a closer look at how these women present. But I first want to lay the foundation around definitions of narcissism because I think that we have this layman's term of narcissism that's unhelpful and inaccurate. We're using it in a way that's quite derogatory, right? It is getting thrown around as an insult, right? Many years ago, we used to call people schizo or psycho, or we'd say that someone's bipolar, and now narcissism is getting thrown away in a completely inaccurate and derogatory way. So I'd like to do something to change that. I've got a couple of notes to my right here, just to keep me on track. Narcissism exists on a spectrum from healthy and adaptive, normal, to maladaptive and pathological. And so we all live in this spectrum in between. We all have healthy narcissistic responses. I would make the argument that when you're in a relationship with someone who's highly narcissistic, it's going to trigger your own narcissism, both healthy and unhealthy. It's important that this definition be clarified to help cut through some of the confusion that most of us carry around that. Narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder often is coexisting with another disorder. Depression, anxiety. I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I'm going to say ADHD. I've seen way too many people with both traits not to bring that up here. Not that if you have ADHD, you're more likely to be narcissistic. I don't think that. I think that developmentally there could be that that risk, but I need to take a deeper dive into that research. But all of our personalities are made up essentially of five main factors. And the two most common ones are our level of introversion and extroversion. Now, we also have something called agreeableness, right? It's a great word. And what goes along with agreeableness is agitation, right? We also have neuroticism, right? I do not like that word, but neuroticism is about our propensity to insecurity, to anxiety, to ruminating, to worry about what people are thinking about us. So you can see as I'm presenting this, perhaps where I'm going with it. But grandiose narcissists are more out there, in your face. They're more extroverted, right? I would say like people are their fuel, right? They tend to be more dramatic. You tend to know when they walk in the room. You know, they can take up a lot of space, they can take up a lot of oxygen. They are continually drawing from people for their own ego equanimity, for sure, but also, you know, to keep their sense of self-esteem at a particular level for self-regulation, right? These ones are more obvious to spot, right? Um, and physically, they look different. They are likely a little bit more status concerned. They may like nice things. They're more materialistic. They will probably pay a lot of attention to their hair, their skin. So if we're talking about women, I'm talking about um, being physique obsessed, uh, probably seeking plastic surgery when the time comes, or a little bit of Botox, cosmetic procedures. You know, they tend to have a very interesting relationship with their reflection in the mirror, right? I'm not saying vulnerable narcissists don't do that. They do, but it's going to be more obvious with someone who's grandiose. And I would say it aligns with even tipping into some more somatic narcissism, right? People who are really focused on their bodies. So, vulnerable narcissists, on the other hand, are likely to be more introverted. They're likely to be less agreeable, but more neurotic. So, more anxious. They tend to worry more. They're not going to be as fun to be around. They're not as personable. They may come off as insecure. So this looks really different than the stereotypical idea we have of narcissism. Now, if I can step out of talking about this through such a clinical lens and bring this down to earth a little bit, or down to what's going to be a little bit more meaningful, I think these are women who are damsels in distress, right? And I think men are drawn to them because of that presentation. They will often be alone. They often play the victim. You're often going to see this kind of body language where they're kind of holding themselves in tight and they're kind of bent over, like they look like they need to be rescued. I think that there probably in vulnerable narcissism is a high tendency for perfectionism, which is very different than grandiose narcissism, by the way. They will come off as shy or insecure. They may be a little bit more successful in work because they don't have quite as much as the overt or obvious relational issues. I think within a relationship, the thing that probably I've heard the most is that nothing you ever do is good enough. So you would like it feels like the line is continually being moved, right? It will feel like you try something and that doesn't work, and you give something and that doesn't work. And it will feel like perhaps you're even a personal project. for her. So what you wear, what you do, how much money you make is none of that is going to feel good enough. She will spend a lot of time comparing and competing, and this isn't going to be obvious. This is going to be quite nuanced and at times difficult to clock. But a lot of looking around her, kind of like peeking out, right, from a protective place to see what other people are doing. Perhaps a lot of studying behind the scenes, right? I've met some vulnerable narcissists and they're quiet, right? They sit quietly. You can tell that they're contemptuous or they're judging or, that they're not always as charming as grandiose narcissists, but they're quietly observing, they're quietly clocking what everyone else is doing. Within the relationship, you may experience what I call intermittent reinforcement. It's hard to say, intermittent reinforcement. So if you do something they want, you may get rewarded. If you don't, they're going to withdraw their love and attention. They can also have rage, can become incredibly dysregulated, and are also prone to long stretches of silent treatment, probably far more than the grandiose ones are. They are perpetually the victim. So it doesn't matter what the situation is, they're the victim every single time. They have a lot of high standards. And in my opinion, there are some correlations between vulnerable narcissism and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And I've spent the last few months parsing out the differences because there are so many overlaps, and I think OCPD is not diagnosed enough. Vulnerable narcissists are more prone to anxiety, worry, rumination. But most of us, when we have anxiety, rumination, worry, we're worrying about other people. Vulnerable narcissists are worrying about themselves and what other people think of them. So that's a fundamental difference clinically, right? I once had someone who probably is a vulnerable narcissist come to me and try to make the argument that she's really insecure. And I laughed, right? I laughed because I was like, no, insecure people are people pleasers. They care what people think. They're very invested in maintaining a sense of closeness and relationship with other people. This is not true for vulnerable narcissists. I think there is just as much entitlement, but it's going to look different than the grandiose narcissist. So, like if you went out and bought yourself something nice, you can bet that she's going to feel that she needs to have that as well. Their tendency to interpersonal exploitation, I think, is a little different as well. And I think the way that vulnerable narcissists, at least women, I think one of the ways that the entitlement can manifest or be observed is in patterns of copying. Now, I think all narcissists do this because they lack a core identity, but I think it's going to be it'll be more subtle, but perhaps more frequent in someone who has a little bit more of that vulnerable presentation. And often this is masked by anxiety, by depression. I think that they can have periods of variable mood that make this difficult to notice. I'm just trying to think of some of the more obvious things. I think you'll feel like you have to walk on eggshells around them, and I think you may even feel like you are in service to this person. And even once it appears like you have successfully rescued them, it won't be the right thing. You can't, because no one can, fill that particular void. These are, when you go to separate or divorce from someone like this, I think you're going to be in for a surprise. They will be much more mercenary and victim oriented than you ever could have expected. And I think this is true with anyone who crosses them, honestly. Like, to a lesser, to a certain extent, rather, what you see with someone who's grandiose is what you see is what you get. With someone who presents as more vulnerable, I don't think that that's as obvious. So these are people who will take you by surprise. These are people who are kind of, if I can use the word, silently stalking. And in relationship, these are people who want everything to look perfect on the outside, while everything on the inside includes a lot of suffering for yourself and quite likely your kids. I do think the same patterns of having kids who are favorites and kids who are perhaps scapegoated or blamed or named as being the one who is the problem, the identified patient. I think all those same patterns still apply within these kinds of marriages. I also believe that vulnerable narcissists are more likely to have people they confide in, people who do their bidding, people who are their who talk for them, people who stand up for them. So I don't like the term flying monkey, but that, of course, is what I'm talking about. It's just so stupid. And I happen to really have a soft spot for the Wicked Witch of the West, maybe. But this is again perhaps where they're a bit exploitive, is they will have other people do their bidding. And I've watched this happen in real time, right? And so in bullying dynamics, especially with girls, there's the girl who overtly seems to be the one in charge, but then there's the one who's doing all of the hurtful things, right? And not, I would be willing to bet that's more than likely going to be the person serving that more vulnerable narcissist. So if you are married to this person, they will have probably not many, but they will definitely have people that they are constantly complaining to about you, right? It's like, what is that? Like a peanut gallery? Is that the expression? There will be a peanut gallery of people who are hearing her story and they're believing her. I know I've been on the receiving end of that when I've had clients who are vulnerable narcissists and who are trying to create a narrative about their relationship. They are also far more likely to label you as being the self-absorbed one or the one with all of the pathology. I do not think they have any more insight or awareness than anyone else. They also pathologically lack empathy, although I think they can feign or fake kindness better, perhaps, than other narcissists, right? It can look like they're doing good and kind things. And to the outside world, it can look like they're a good wife, they're a good mother. But my closing comment is these are women who are really suffering. These are women who've very likely grown up with a lot of benign neglect or high expectations in their families of origin. These are women who I think are never quite able to achieve a full creative capacity, and a lot of their potential goes unnoticed. One thing about grandiose narcissists is they've got audacity, right? Like they're out there grinding it. The vulnerable narcissist is sitting back and saying, "Why isn't this me?" Right? Why is that usually other woman out there achieving that and I'm not? And also, they struggle in female relationships. They struggle in friendships, with family, with coworkers. They will always be coming home with the story of how so and so treated them badly. So, what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis is someone who has that inner agitation. I think it's more agitation than anxiety. And it becomes your job to help make that feel better, but you never really will be able to. So if this resonates with you, hit like, hit like, subscribe. If it sounds like someone you know could benefit from hearing this, share it with them and join me in the conversation. My work is not only for the ladies. I would love to work with men one on one in reclaiming power and authenticity in your life. And if you'd like to work away at your own pace, I have an online course accessible through the website called Finding Your Way. So thanks for tuning in. I wish you a very good rest of your day until we meet in the space again next time.